Music fans all over the world tweeted with hashtag MTVEMA during the MTV European Music Awards. Teaching students in Tater 218 is just one of Tishkoff's many passions.
We're here at the TD Bank Sports Center on York Hill. As you can see, the line is really piling up.
Racist acts continue after the president and the chancellor of the University of Missouri resigned.
But some of the symptoms that people recognize aren't actually true. You don't necessarily get itchy right away. How did you find the people to create that community? Are you willing to stand in long lines for that discounted TV? Erica shows us how to get the best deals on Black Friday.
Quinnipiac offered free flu shots to students, faculty, and staff today on the York Hill campus. The only requirement is bringing a Quinnipiac ID. Despite these critiques, for students like Balamian, Quinnipiac is a school worth going to. Neliana Ferraro, QNN.
Quinnipiac University freshman Annie Ishfaq wears a hijab, a headscarf worn by many Muslim American women. During her middle school years, her classmates started treating her differently because of this custom and her faith.
In 7th grade, I remember being asked, are you Osama bin Laden's daughter? And I was really shocked. I'm like, are you serious? I'm not his relative. I'm not anything related to him.
Ishfaq isn't the only one who's gone through something like this. A poll by Gallup found 48% of Muslim Americans say they've experienced racial or religious discrimination. Jason Seacat is a psychology professor at Western New England University. He says our brains are programmed to discriminate.
Human beings like to take mental shortcuts. We like to be able to make quick decisions about people, to know where we stand in everyday life.
Seacat says it's easier for people to make mental shortcuts about Muslims when events like the Paris terrorist attacks are fresh in everyone's minds. Despite this recent tragedy, Ishfaq says things have gotten better for her since she's come to college. She says the Quinnipiac community is more accepting and mature.
There are some people who still think that, who still think negatively of Muslims, but there are most people who don't.
But QU's Catholic priest wants to do more. Jordan Lanigan will host an event next semester to teach students about different faiths and help them meet different people.
When you have that, it's much more difficult to then speak of a billion people as a they and put a single, they're all like this kind of a statement.
Seacat said we can help stop discrimination by speaking out when we hear hurtful remarks. That and educating our peers will make a difference. Neliana Ferraro, Q30 News.
On a Thursday at 8 a.m., Quinnipiac professor Bill Buick decided to discuss a topic that's been all over the news recently: school shootings.
I think what we're seeing is tragic. I don't think it's going to end today. We're going to continue to see gun violence.
If that's the case, is there a way to find potential shooters before they strike? Many people think of shooters as loners playing video games. That's not necessarily true. The Secret Service and the U.S. Department of Education teamed up to learn more about the traits of school shooters. Out of the cases researchers looked at from 1974 to 2000, only 35% of them were described as loners. 15% of the shooters showed some interest in violent video games. Buick disagrees with this study. He says people can tell when someone could become a threat.
I think the majority of students would say that person is just different, that person is giving me a very bad vibe, but I'm going to stiff arm them. I'm going to keep them out of my zone.
Officer David Hartman is the spokesperson for the New Haven Police Department. He agrees people can sense when someone is a bit off.
To perpetrate a crime like this, you have to have an inherent creepiness. You have to have an instability somewhere.
But creepiness isn't enough to categorize people. It also doesn't give police enough reasonable suspicion to arrest someone. So are video games the telling sign of a potential shooter? Hartman thinks it might be something other than gaming.
So if your crappy parenting is that you don't want to pay attention to your child, and therefore they're sitting down on their bed playing a violent video game all day, I don't think it's the video game, I think it's the neglect.
But Professor Buick says violent games are definitely a factor. Kids are able to learn gun and ammunition types at a young age, and he says video games desensitizes them to violence. Whether or not a shooter is actually apprehended beforehand based on these profiles, Officer Hartman has some suggestions in case you do find yourself in a situation like that.
You do not shelter in place when something happens. You run like hell. And if you can't run, you hide. And if you can't hide, you fight.
Neliana Ferraro, QNN. Meet Louise de Venero. She has lived at Atria Larson Place, a senior living home, for 2 years. 35 years ago, she was a smoker. Back then, smoking was an activity de Venero could do with her friends.
We would go out to a club or something, and we thought we were all it with the cigarette and a cocktail.
Jill Mozaika is a nurse at Atria. She smoked for 12 years before leaving cigarettes behind for good. But what made these two quit? Some lawmakers would like to believe it's the increase in cigarette taxes over the years. A study published in Health Economics says otherwise. The study found a $1 increase in taxes decreased cigarettes smoked per day by only about 4 to 5% for people over 50 years old. The researchers explained addiction is so strong that it doesn't have much of an impact on older smokers. Instead of quitting, seniors would rather spend money on their cigarettes instead of food or housing. Brett Gerstenhaber is a pulmonologist in Hamden, Connecticut. He says there are many different reasons people quit smoking. Some quit because they've been diagnosed with lung cancer, while others are just sick of having side effects like phlegm. But Gerstenhaber thinks that a $1 increase in the cigarette tax just isn't enough to actually have an effect on adult smoking habits.
We're nickeling and diming our way up the tax ladder. And I think somebody should just bite the bullet and say, here's a $10 tax, and put it out there.
He said taxes come the closest to being the umbrella solution for deterring all age groups from the habit. Mozaika doesn't think cigarette taxes play a role in the choice.
So nobody cares. If they want to smoke, they're going to smoke. It's like buying any sort of drug.
For Mozaika, it was a friend's insistence that finally convinced her to stop. De Venero stopped smoking soon after her mother died.
I said to myself, you know, Louise, you are going to stop smoking. And I gave it up just like that.
And as Gerstenhaber said, supportive family and friends may be the key to kicking the habit. Neliana Ferraro, QNN. Assistant Professor Nathaniel Hendren wanted to find out how moving to different neighborhoods affects children. He looked at 5 million movers across the United States and calculated their predicted future income changes. What he found has confirmed what economists have theorized for a long time. Parents who want better education for their children move to regions with more tax funds dedicated to learning. Based on our calculations using Hendren's data, kids living in neighborhoods with high crime rates, segregation, and low marriage rates don't do as well. Living in New Haven for 20 years would take an estimated average of 8.36% off of a child's future expected income. Move 45 minutes north to Hartford, and living there will give a child a 2.58% increase. The study shows even worse outcomes when you take a look at the boys. Hendren estimated boys living in New Haven for 20 years would see a 14.96% decrease in their expected future income. Hartford boys would see a 4.98% increase. Quinnipiac professor and economist Don Johnson says these issues are more complex than people may think.
Certainly they can't be solved as simply as saying, well, just move everybody. I'm sorry, but you really need to improve all the schools instead of saying, well, just move everybody to the good ones where they don't fit because there isn't enough room for them.
Steve Driffin is one of the people trying to find a solution. He works for the Connecticut Center for Arts and Technology. As programming director, Driffin coordinates with Lincoln Bassett in New Haven to make after-school programs. Kids there can pick up an instrument, play rugby, and learn how to paint.
I'm not trying to create, musicians or artists or anything like that, but hopefully through this they can get the notion and idea that I can do anything.
Driffin has already started to see changes in some of the students who have histories of behavioral problems. He hopes new initiatives like their reading program will help students even more in the upcoming year and for the rest of their lives. Neliana Ferraro, QNN.